Hey everybody, welcome to episode 186 of Fight Chat Friday. So, can AI be your new sparring coach? That's the question for today. So, we pose 10 sparring questions to Chat GPT and ask Chat GPT to come up with some answers and some suggestions based on those questions. So we're going to go through them today, have a look. Some of them actually aren't the worst in the world, to be honest. Some generic advice for sure. Some advice which is a little bit different to what we would say, I would guess.
Yeah.
So we'll go through each question, show you what ChatGPT suggests, and then maybe give our 2 cents on each one as well.
All right, here we go. So, very first one, what are the most common mistakes beginners make in ITF sparring, and how can I avoid them? So, GPT says beginners often telegraph their movements, forget to maintain a strong guard, practice staying relaxed and keeping movements fluid. So, I think like the first part of that, there's something to it. So, the idea of beginners often telegraph their movements. What does that look like for us? It usually involves stepping before you kick, or dropping the hands, or picking up the hands, making something very obvious preemptive movement before you go to punch. Very often it's dropping the hands as you lift the leg, those kind of things. And forgetting to maintain a strong guard. There is an awful tendency for beginners to watch or to kind of copy the bad habits almost of like the more experienced competitors, who are happy carrying a low guard from a long distance and will generally transition their guard as they move through into contact range, whereas beginners will just happily wait there with their hands down and get hit in the head. So I suppose that part of it, I think it's picked out a few or two mistakes that are fairly common, as opposed to practicing staying relaxed, which is probably impossible.
Yeah, well, that's it. See, like a lot of time, people when they're beginning, they will probably be so uptight and stressed with the whole idea of sparring another person. They will probably almost get like jitters and what we call in jiu-jitsu is kind of like when you have somebody new, they kind of spaz out a little bit and they kind of freak and panic. So that can kind of be the case as well, and like people throw the kitchen sink a little bit. So I think for beginners, what you would probably suggest, some mistakes for them to avoid will be number one, not block techniques. Try to avoid and use your feet rather than your hands to stop targets coming towards you.
Yeah.
In the other side as well, it would probably to avoid anything like your traditional boxing stances or anything like that. Try to develop a stance which is effective for kicking and punching effectively, and also how you can kind of basically start out to be able to avoid move, and you don't have to be involved in every single exchange that comes your way. So, what ideas would you be looking to avoid for beginners, Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, I just think this idea of keeping movements fluid and practice staying relaxed, what we're really talking about is uh, training and developing your sparring against the level of opposition that doesn't cause you to spaz out, as you say. So you want to have that to start with, people getting used to contact, getting used to movement and maintaining distance, and trying to do that in a way where you're not under an awful lot of pressure to make good decisions and choices initially, and then you scale the degree of difficulty and the degree of opposition to suit the level of the person's decision making. So yeah, but I think it's uh, what AI has come up with in terms of the first two difficulties, so telegraphing the movements and not maintaining a good guard, they're not bad things to start with. So
No, I would
let's
say
see what.
a blue belt level answer. I would say.
There you go. There you go. So, what are the key strategies for adapting to different opponent styles during a match? Richie, take this one on.
Yeah, so AI, what does it say? Observe your opponent's tendencies and adjust your tactics accordingly, staying flexible and unpredictable. Quite generic, but not wrong by any means. So, what
Hmm.
are the key things that you want to be able to do to adapt to different styles? Number one, you want to be comfortable adapting to different styles and have different styles, which means you need to train with different training partners, first of all, to be able to understand different styles, different distances and ranges. How do you deal with somebody who's very strong with hands? How do you deal with somebody who's a really flexible and dominant kicker? So these are problems and situations that you must put yourself in first of all to be able to come up with some ideas and to work on it accordingly. And then when we get into more like competition mode, we want to be able to adapt quickly, which means it comes down to you being able to have the know-how to adjust your tactics based on if something is working or if it's not. So that's essentially what you're looking to do in that regard. So during a match is quite difficult because usually you're going to have short rounds, which means you don't have a massive time to understand, reflect, and go on. as opposed to, let's say, boxing where you might have 10 rounds of 3 minutes. It's a long time, plenty of opportunities to come in between rounds to chat with your coach. Bit different for us in ITF.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just focusing on this being tactics rather than strategy, your strategy might stay the same and be based on your abilities match by match. But if your opponent steps forward and they've got their right leg instead of their left in front, or they don't favor side kick, or they really want to get to hands and fight from a closer distance, it's those tactical choices that I suppose you're talking about there. So it's interesting that AI came back with the idea that we asked about strategies and they came back with tactics. So I think that was quite telling. So just from our perspective, strategy is the overall game plan for a match, and the tactics are how you respond to individual actions or much more small scale moments within the match.
All right, so the next one, what should I focus on during solo training sessions to improve my sparring performance? AI says you should work on your conditioning, flexibility, and technique drills to refine skills outside of sparring sessions. It's hard to disagree with this, really, because
For
if
sure.
I had a student who asked me this, I would say, yeah, your sparring training is going to broadly come from you working with a live training partner who you can interact with. They are the skills we're really developing, because what is sparring? It's an interaction between another human being. So if you don't have another human being to work with, then the skills aren't really going to be as appropriate as you want them to be. So, like I suggest, work on your conditioning. That's something you can do alone. Flexibility work and anything physical, really. Your mental training and mental preparation can be something that you could do. And technique, working on individual techniques. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. If you, for example, want to train a banded Dulya Chagi into your arsenal and you don't really have one naturally, that's something you could practice to refine the movement, just understand how you move your body to get that a little bit more fluid. And then that's the next step then, where you transition it in to be able to incorporate it into more live situation with some resistance, ideally with a partner.
Yeah, I love that answer. So how do I optimize my training regimen to peak for competitions? And AI suggests you gradually increase intensity and volume of training leading up to competitions while allowing for adequate rest and recovery. And I think that answer is maybe not great. So when you're actually planning for, let's say, the physical training or the development of your energy systems, you're typically varying intensity against volume. And I think what we're talking about is that peaking element here, where generally speaking, you're looking at a maintenance of intensity and a decrease in the overall training volume as you come up to the competition. So you're still maintaining match level intensity once you've built up to it, but you're reducing the volume of training to allow the body to be well recovered, feeling fresh, rested, and recovered before the competition starts. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at, in particular at the taper. If you increase both intensity and volume, you have a very limited amount of time that you can do both of those for before your body basically explodes. So maybe some dangerous recommendations from AI there.
Yeah, I think as well, something that I actually suggested, we have Euros coming up next week. Some of my students are going to the Euros, and I said to them last night, ideally, we want to be putting the shackles on you right now and holding you back from sparring, because when you get there, we want you to be excited to get your sparring gear on, excited to get in the ring, excited to get on the mats. If you're training and you're flat out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you're just training, and you have your sparring gear on, that excitement and that level of anticipation isn't going to be the same. And I think it's actually something that's quite important, which is it also feeds into the mental side of performance.
Yeah, that feeling of freshness, I think it's important for sure. How can I analyze my sparring matches to identify areas for improvement? So that's I think a good strong question. And so AI says review footage of your sparring matches, identify strengths and weaknesses, and work on specific areas in training. And again, I think we've got one here, Richie, that's quite generic in its response, as you might expect, but there's a good core in that. And I mean, I think the idea of number one, uh, review footage. You need video. If we're
Yep.
talking about analyzing your sparring match, having a conversation afterwards with a coach, pretty good. But both people will be limited by the emotion of the event. So you only see one angle of the match. You only see one element of it while you're watching it live. Whereas a camera has the ability to dispassionately watch the whole thing, maybe take in the scoreboard, what you and your opponent were doing, and see it all without flinching, without kind of getting him involved in it, not looking from side to side. So it gives you a very, very flat view of what was happening, and there's a good chance then to kind of dig back into it. One of the things I think is important, though, is that you should know what you were trying to do before you go looking at the video tells you what happened, but that's just a snapshot without context. You should know what it was that you were trying to do, and then compare your performance against and the outcome against the expectations that you've set in your plan. And I think maybe that's the bit that's missing from this one.
Yeah, I think as well we need to analyze, is it which of the four areas, maybe it's all four, that you need to look into. Is it the physical, is it the mental side, is it the technical, or is it the, let's call it, tactical side? So
Mm-hmm.
if we can break it up into those four areas, which ones are we going to really focus on as areas for improvement? And of course, it's like what you said as well, you need to kind of have an idea of what the overall plan is first, which means you need to have a good understanding of what the objective for sparring is for anybody. Like, how are you effective at this game? What do you need to be good at? So you need to have a good understanding of the long term approach, or maybe whether it's through watching videos like this where you're studying and you're understanding what it needs to happen for you to be at that perfect performance level. And then when you understand that, it's a bit easier to kind of go forward and reverse engineer from there. But it's very, very difficult to improve and find areas that you can identify as your weaknesses if you don't really understand the big concept of the game of sparring and how to be successful at it.
For sure. So, how do I develop better timing and anticipation in sparring? And AI suggests that you should practice shadowboxing and focus on reacting quickly to your opponent's movements. I think this is one of the weaker answers that we got.
Yeah, I hate this
Um,
one.
yeah, this is pretty bad. The reality is that timing and anticipation are a two-person thing. So you can't work on your timing without an opponent. You can't work on your anticipation without an opponent. And I think that a fundamental premise of everything we do is that you're perceiving what's happening in front of you or what's happening in the situation or around you, and you're constantly making choices based on that information that's coming to hand. Your opponent is trying to interfere with that information with feints, with changes of distance, with hand movements, with empty kicks or fakes, and you are trying to do the exact same to them. And that whole interaction is what develops your timing and anticipation. You're not going to do it by working out in your imagination against the imaginary opponent, because they'll always do what you want them to do. And the idea of focusing on reacting quickly to your opponent's movements, this is something that's been very popular in training forever. I bang the pads and then you hit it. I put it in front of you and then you hit it quickly. And on some basic level, having a stimulus and a response is good, but the stimulus could be a lot more appropriate to what an opponent will actually do. And
Yeah,
this was,
like
sorry,
a
Rich, you
lot
go
of the
first.
cues as well, Adrian, are subconscious. So
Yeah,
like a lot of these things, they're not actually us consciously reacting. It's, for example, timing, right? Let's talk about somebody throws a side kick towards you and you must pick the right moment for you to counter it without getting hit with the kick. That's almost a subconscious feeling. So that timing for me is a feeling thing, which happens and is developed throughout being in that situation a lot. So like I have to give Chat GPT a bit of credit that it didn't put up the reaction lights and all these things that people tend to use.
okay.
Like that's what we want the Instagram answer, isn't it? So the anticipation training and the timing and reaction training. So we see the F1 drivers, they catch those balls with the reactions that are dropped from a height and things like that. There's
Yeah,
numerous studies that suggest that all timing, reaction, and anticipation is highly specific to the context of what the actual activity is. So, for example, baseball hitters, they were studied with the batting practice, the thing that fires out the ball, and
yeah,
the reaction time does not improve because where they're actually taking information is from the cues of how the thrower has their body, how they turn, etc. And all these things are information taken in subconsciously for us to be able to come up with an action on cue that is really the specific anticipation and reaction and timing. So the big takeaway here would be to everything that you want for these things needs to be specific to the actual activity that you're trying to improve on.
Okay. What are some effective drills for improving reaction time and decision making in sparring? So this kind of one leads to the other. Incorporate drills that require quick decision making and simulate realistic sparring scenarios. Now, funnily enough, it has actually hit a very, very important point in this one. So the simulate realistic sparring scenarios in terms of the decision making, absolutely, absolutely true. And some of the things that we talk about are, thinking correctly under pressure situations or teacups. Um, and a lot of this comes from putting people into scenarios in sparring where they're going to be making decisions repeatedly, often, that are decisions they're going to face when they get into the ring. So that's really about effective practice design. It's creating the right situations, right scenarios, so that the kind of decisions people are making when they're training really accurately reflect the kind of decisions that they're having to make in the ring. And there's an awful lot that we can do for that. So I think Chat GPT hasn't done a bad job in terms of finding the family or the general area we should be working in. But obviously, we might not expect it to find the specifics or name the activities. There's not enough information out there on the internet yet. We're not that popular, Richie.
No, no. But see, drills as well is something that, like, for example, reaction time drill I could see people thinking that a drill might be you waving a belt in front of people and they have to get in the gap of the belt to attack with a blitz or something like that.
Sure.
That's not
Yeah.
really going to be as effective as we would like it. So, to improve your reaction time, as we said, that's going to be from you being in the situation with somebody working on a specific task. And this can all be solved if you have two active sides when you train more often than not. Okay, if you're waving a belt and you have a pad holder, we don't have two active sides working in unison. So that's the big takeaway. If you can work on just this one particular thing, it's going to improve your reaction time and your decision making tenfold. So whatever drills or whatever your answer to the word drill is, then just try have that one thing of two active sides where you have an objective and your training partner has an objective. If you can go from there, I think that's the best way you can improve your decision making and your reaction time for sparring.
So, what about the best ways to prevent injuries while training and competing in ITF sparring? And I think this one is interesting because it could be quite a bit more generic to sport in general. So, AI tells us to focus on a proper warm up and stretching routine, use appropriate protective gear, and listen to your body to avoid overtraining. And what's interesting there, I think the second and third one are in some ways even better than the first one. I think there's no harm in focusing on a proper warm up. The stretching routine is maybe a little easy to misinterpret or to get carried away with. That doesn't necessarily mean that every muscle needs to be stretched for 20 or 30 seconds in a static kind of fashion. It, if we take that as warm up and mobility, maybe that's appropriate enough. And we'd be looking at, yeah, get the body up to temperature, mobilize, and then have some activity that's specific to what's going to follow. So if we're going to be doing, special technique in jumping, we need some high speed, you know, mobility work. So those fast leg swings, we need to have something that's very appropriate to and we need some jumping. So something that's appropriate to what we're after. Whereas if we're going to be doing pattern, totally different thing. And then the appropriate protective gear, maybe that brings up a conversation because maybe the sparring gear, as in the approved sparring equipment, isn't always the appropriate gear for your training session. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that we're lucky in our discipline when it comes to combat sports that it's not one that has big knocks and bangs in comparison to others. So I think on that front we're okay. But I think the big injuries that happen for us generally are coming from the likes of ankles and maybe knees and things like that. So obviously mobility is a factor there and imbalances. So when they said stretching routines, that would be something that I would be considering there. Are there any imbalances that we have that could be worked on that would help us to maybe avoid any major injuries there, particularly with some
Sure.
joints, etc.? And then strength. Do you have enough strength behind you to be able to sustain and to be resilient enough in terms of physically resilient to be able to go through training and have a strong enough body? A lot of time if you have injuries, it's your body is just not strong enough in a particular range or in a particular movement, and then all of a sudden there's something goes wrong. So of course, like these generic answers like overtraining and all these things as well are big factors. But I think if you can avoid any major imbalances and stay on top of mobility. And then, as well as that, have a decent level of strength to support all the movements that you're going through. I think that's a good base there to avoid any injuries, ideally. But yeah, it's going to just come with the nature of it, isn't it? It's like some things are just freak accidents as well, and that's just part of
Absolutely.
being an active sport.
The only thing I throw into that is when we're talking about both sides having roles, and as we increase that dial of representativeness and make our training a little bit closer to the real deal, some techniques that we use are a little bit more difficult to safely train than others. And I would particularly point out things like the back kick, particularly if you're defending against
Yeah.
the blitz. The reverse turning kick as well is one that can be very, very difficult to train safely, because when it lands, and the other person knowing it might be coming doesn't always lead it to be safe. So sometimes we'll use the WTF body armor when we're training the back kick, and it is an element where if we are trying to build reverse turning kick into the a contested or an opposed training exercise, we are quite careful about doing that, and sometimes that happens in a slightly less representative and more limited way. But those are, for me anyway, some of the things where we might look at different protective gear to normal. Okay.
All right, so how can I improve my footwork to be more effective in the ring? ChatGPT says focus on drills that emphasize agility, balance, and lateral movement to enhance your footwork. Again, quite a generic answer, and something that anybody without real experience or expertise might suggest. One of the biggest mistakes that I made coming up through the ranks was probably putting too much time into generic agility, ladder training, and steps and movements like that. So drilling like particular steps and sequences that might come up, but then they actually never come up in a real situation. So, like, the best thing that I think you could ever do for your footwork in the ring is to practice just avoiding, without using any techniques, against a real opponent. So maybe bring it down a little bit, only body kicks. And now all you have to do is stay in a specific area and not get hit with any body kick and not leave the area. That would improve your footwork and your timing and your distance way better than anything else, in my opinion. Whether it's going up and down through ladders with specific steps, whether it's the open close fast toe tap things that you see there where people doing on Instagram and all that. So for me, I think that you have to get in there again with an actual training partner and work and be able to move around, adjust, and then again we can ramp up that dial effectively. Then maybe we'll eventually get to your training partner has all the shots in the book and can do anything, and all you got to do is just move around in a specific area without getting hit. And then eventually you start to bring in your counter attacks and your direct counter attacks as well, and before you know it, you're very effective on your feet and are quite agile in there to not get hit and have really good defense as a result as well.
Nicely said. Okay, so our last one then. How can I build mental toughness and confidence for high pressure sparring situations? And ChatGPT says visualize success, set achievable goals, focus on your strengths during training to build confidence. And I think this is one of the better answers, to be quite honest. It's fairly strong. There's quite a bit in there. So touching base with a few of the things that we would have mentioned over the years leading up to this, confidence is based typically on evidence of past success. So it's if you need to build up confidence over time by achieving what you're capable of at the time, or making note of the achievements that you have, setting yourself appropriate goals. That's important. Achieving those goals, but then setting that achievement into your kind of your bank account of confidence that says, yeah, look, I know I can do that. Visualizing success can be useful, but not success as in you're standing on the podium of the World Championships with the gold medal, but success as in your whatever strategy that you're trying to play, whatever tactic you're trying to employ, whatever technique you're using. If you can visualize it much more fine grained than that, so bring it down to the actions you're going to take and visualize yourself completing those actions that, when they accumulate, are going to lead to being successful in the ring. Because we're always a little bit careful about focusing on things you can't control. So if you set goals around things you can't control, like winning or getting through 3 rounds or whatever it happens to be, the draw can always go against you. You can have, a decision go wrong. You can make a mistake, but it doesn't mean you haven't got better. And that the resilience and the confidence is going to come from uh, knowing that you've set yourself a goal that is achievable, that you've made an honest effort to pursue and achieve that goal. You've turned over the stones, you've done what needed to be done, and you've given it an honest effort in the ring. And if you've done that and you more often than not achieve the goals because they were reasonable to achieve, you can build that bank of confidence. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, so like the mental toughness can come as well from how you frame things and how you speak to yourself really. So like the smart thoughts we call it in our own little package there that we have on our mental training. But like for example, an easy one, I have to do something. You reframe that to I get to do something. So just by
Yeah.
having little reframes for particular things, you can really just switch your mindset on how you see whatever it is in life, not just in sparring or not just competition, whatever. So that's a very important one there for mental toughness. For challenge, for confidence, challenge is a massive thing. So number one, challenging yourself to go against people who are a little bit outside of your comfort zone and maybe better than you and more experienced, whatever. And then eventually, by challenging yourself and putting yourself in this situation, you will start to gain a little bit more confidence as you do it. But you must be courageous to do that. So there's the three C's. So you first of all have to be courageous, which can come from reframing things and having that not having a threat mindset, but more of a challenge mindset. How can I challenge myself here? Easier said than done. You have to be courageous to get that done and put yourself out there and not take things so personal. And then if you can do that, you'll eventually start to find that your confidence is really skyrocketing. You have a lot of confidence, you have a lot of evidence, as Adrian said, and then as a result, your mental toughness will start to build as well. So they all go hand in hand.
So, folks, I don't know what questions you might have asked ChatGPT, but we're kind of the opinion that you can get some good generic wisdom out there collected from all across the internet, but maybe filtering it, making best use of it still requires a coach, and certainly making it actually specific to your situation and our ITF Taekwondo Sparring requires a little bit more expertise in the topic than ChatGPT can currently offer. But, there's always the next version.
There you go. Yeah. So hope you enjoyed that. Something different this one. Tune into the next one and we'll see you then.
Bye now.